Hey, everybody. Welcome to your life group. And I'd also like to welcome me to your life group. So glad that we're here together tonight as we dive in. We started a new series on Sunday called What Does It Mean to Be a Christian? And we spent time looking at Matthew 6, verses 1 through 4. And so before we get started and before we dive in, I want you guys to take a minute and read it out loud together. I'll wait right here. So in this passage, Jesus is giving us basically a compare and contrast of what culture and religious people said and what he says. And he says, the hypocrites in the street are doing one thing, but I'm asking you to do something different. And there's tons of ways that this applies to us today. In one of the translations in the NIV, it says, don't practice righteousness. And I love that verb because we're never going to perfect righteousness. Only God can do that. But we can practice it. And like Jesus says here, there is a wrong way to practice righteousness and there's a right way to practice righteousness. So a couple of examples on that. You can practice righteousness in your prayer life. So you could incorrectly practice it by, maybe the words that you use in your prayer, maybe like flowery, big words, you pray that way. Or maybe even in the length of your prayer. So you're spending 5 minutes praying to the Lord while the chicken's getting cold. That is a way to incorrectly practice righteousness in your prayer life. There's other ways too, right? You can worship outwardly so other people can see, or you can worship solely only so that God can see. It's the same also in our quiet time. You can sit down with your quiet time and hope to hear from the Lord, or you can do your quiet time but post about it on social media because you really want to hear from other people about it. Pastor Rob talked about this idea on Sunday. It's the idea of an audience of one. We can oftentimes make other people our audience, but Jesus encourages us here to make God our audience. We serve and live and exist for one person and one person only. Now, it's not however many people follow us on social media, that's not our audience. It's not our spouse or who we wish was our spouse or our child or our parent. None of them are our audience. We exist for God. He is our sole audience. So my first question for you tonight is the idea of living for an audience of one difficult for you? Why or why not? Okay, so my second question, it's going to require a little bit of vulnerability, but go there with me. In the past, what are some ways that you have tried to look righteous instead of actually practicing righteousness? And what does Jesus say are the consequences for this? So after he kind of introduces this idea, Jesus goes on to give us examples throughout the rest of Matthew 6. And the first one that he starts with is the idea of giving to the needy. This is a way that we can practice righteousness, and it's an opportunity for us to do it either correctly or incorrectly. Verse 2 says, "Do not announce it with the trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others." Now, there's probably a 2024 version of this. It might be like, if you pay for the person behind you in Starbucks, make sure you post about it on social media. Or if you donate to something, be sure that you get your name on the program or on the big screens or on the brick that goes outside the building that you donated to. If you drop money in the offering bucket at church on Sunday, do it really slowly and make sure people are watching. And maybe throw in a little change so it jingle jangles too. But Jesus says instead, when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. In his message this past week, Pastor Rob talked about two particular words from this verse. It's your Father. And I think giving becomes so much easier, so much more meaningful when we focus on those two words, your Father. And from that, two ideas emerge. The first is our relationship with him. He doesn't ask us to give so that we impress him or because we're obligated to, but it's because of our relationship, because he loves us and we love him and we have a relationship with him. The second thing that emerges from this is that we share a father. We are a family, and so when you see someone in need, they are a part of your family. So we get to help and give because they're part of our family too. So I want you to take a couple minutes and discuss this in your group. It's our last question. When it comes to the topic of giving, why does it matter that God is our Father? What difference does that make? Well, thanks for hanging with me tonight. I hope you guys have had great discussion and can't wait to be back with you next Sunday. I want to tell you about a couple of things. The first is I want to remind you about the generosity challenge that Pastor Rob threw down. That's what you do with the challenge, right? He threw it down for us this morning. And so wherever you are in your generosity journey, I want you to be praying about, if you don't already know, what that looks like, what the next step is for you. So if you don't currently tithe, maybe you used to and you got out of the habit, or maybe you've wanted to start, over the next 60 days, why don't you commit to tithing? Or if you do already tithe, maybe it's your commitment is to give over and above. It could also be that you want to be more generous with your time. Maybe you want to start serving in church. You're not doing that currently. And so maybe that's your commitment. For me, I need to go see my grandpa more. I need to be generous with my time toward him. And so that's going to be one of the things that I do over the next 60 days. And so be thinking about that, be praying about that. And if you haven't turned in your generosity card, bring that back next Sunday. And we would love to have that so we can encourage you over the next 60 days as we become more generous people. The last thing I want to tell you about, Sunday, April 14th, is Day 41 worship service, 6 o'clock that night. We have a lot of great things planned just for us to celebrate all that God did during our church-wide fast. First of all, to share what God did during the fast, to celebrate it, to thank him for it, and then also to look ahead. What do we do now that we've been changed by this and marked by this as a church family? And so make sure you're here. Coffee's ready at 5:45. We'll take communion together and then get started at 6. So we hope to see you Sunday, April 14th. Have a great week.